All right, we are together today with content designers, Frances and Colleen, to talk about how content designers use data and research to make Salesforce products even better. So I'm really happy to learn. I learned a lot the last time I did this a couple of weeks ago. Happy to learn again. So I think, Colleen, you wanted to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to talk a bit about all of the resources that you have as a content designer that are not necessarily you creating your own user testing, which Frances will be covering later. So the first resource that I think everyone should start with is Research and Insights team has a Confluence page. They call it their R&I hub or home. It's where you can access every single study of theirs and all of their readouts and everything like that. So you can go and you can filter by cloud, by product, and you can always get a good overview of something, especially when you're starting on a new product.
Hi, yeah. So user testing is a platform that we use at Salesforce when you have something really specific and you want to look at it, and maybe it's not something that could be covered by R&I because it's super specific on a specific area of the user interface, usability, comprehension, things like that. Our researchers, as Colleen mentioned, have these really wonderful studies that tend to be very strategic, high-level views of a certain area. And then sometimes there are just things where the conversations about a specific label or the way that information is laid out on the UI, and it's just really narrow and it may benefit from some user studies, but it's something you might want to just handle it within your product team, because you get some insights within about 2 to 3 weeks, and you can start making more informed design decisions from there.
That is so cool. And I think, do you have stuff to show us, or are we just going to talk? I think you had some stuff you wanted to show us, right?
I think we both do. Yeah, so I guess I can pull up, I can first show what that R&I page looks like. Great, so this is where you can start just looking through Research and Insights. They have this R&I library, and this is where you can do your deeper searching. But I also wanted to mention, since we are talking about user testing as well, there are other ways to be involved in user testing without doing the test yourself. So for example, I have teams that really love working with our researcher. So what we'll sometimes do is when we're starting on a project, we will pull together a document like this, and we all just throw our questions in there. So this was the PM, UX, and me, and we just went through and we filled all these things out. And at the very bottom is where you can see our raw questions. But our researcher came in here, she saw all the things that we were looking to start to understand as we were starting this project. And she, of course, organized it and made it beautiful. And then she used these questions to guide some of her initial research. And that has gone now all the way into, we just held a workshop with customers at the end of February, where we actually could get really deep on some of these questions after we'd gotten that first round of research. So getting involved in that way can be a really nice way to sort of piggyback on research already happening, but making sure that our content-focused questions are included as part of what we're sending the researcher out to help us find.
Wow. And it seems to me that it's very respectful of the customers to be so organized when you go in and start these conversations, of their time, of course, which is valuable. That's awesome.
Yeah, I really love that, Colleen, because we do the similar thing on some of the projects I'm on, and somewhere in that process, you start to pick out the things that are the larger strategic items, and then things that maybe we can might benefit from, like a smaller thing on user testing, and that's really is the first step. I think if one of the big takeaways from anyone watching this should be to be proactive and start that document, one you just showed, that start capturing it, because it also gets folks involved. It gets them invested into research, whether it's the product manager, designers, and of course the researcher. It gets them kind of invested into a common place where those questions can go.
That's a great insight, actually, is creating, we do that in editing, where we're going to do something, make a bucket and start putting things into the bucket, and then you can shape it. Not as quite as beautifully as what you all have done, but that's awesome.
All right, so the life cycle of a test, if you're going to run one on your own, is about 2 to 3 weeks. If it's your first time running a test or you haven't done one in a while, you may want to err more on like 3 to 4 weeks to give yourself that extra time because there's all these little things that you'll discover along the way. Although hopefully some of these tips will shorten that time. But there are just some things that take time. And first of all, in the life cycle of a test, you want to evaluate the areas of the design that benefit from testing. So we already talked about the place where you can document questions while you're in working sessions with folks, and you can ask questions on that document, and you start to figure out where you want to go a little further in the test. Writing out what you want to learn, that ties right into that, and getting the invested interest in other folks and their collaborators. But then from there, you want to start drafting a test plan. That's where the rubber hits the road. That's where things start to really become actionable, and you start to have a plan ready to actually, figure out what you're going to research and narrow it down. I always recommend consulting with Research and Insights if you can, somewhere around this process when you're drafting that test plan, especially if it's one of your early ones, because they have all kinds of great tips to getting the information you're actually trying to get, because sometimes you think you're asking one thing, but maybe you're really asking another. So I always recommend learning from them and taking advantage of that expertise we have at Salesforce. Next, you have usually a prototype that will be involved in that testing. So the product designer is most likely going to be involved in that. And sometimes you can use images. There's some limitations there. There's also a benefit that, you don't have to worry about users being able to load the Figma prototype properly. So that can be really useful. And then, of course, you implement the test. This is where a lot of time is spent in the recruitment of the participants that are going to be using your test. There are folks that are enrolled on the user testing platform. And that's going to be some time there while you're recruiting for that. Depending on how narrow your audience is, that could take some time, a few days, maybe a week or so. If you have a broader audience, it will take much less time. And then I like to watch as much, if not all, of the recordings and organize my results from there. So let's also now take a look at a test plan. So right off the bat, we'll start with a template, and this one I have it already filled out. You kind of do a background because everyone reading this familiar with what the product is or that the feature might be, and they will kind of understand what problems there might be in there, what we're trying to explore. From there, we'll have our objectives, and then most importantly, we get into, I call these research questions, and then you start looking at the prompt. So with user testing, we typically follow an unmoderated study. And those unmoderated studies means you won't be engaging live with the participant, but rather they'll be walking through a series of prompts that look kind of like a walkthrough, and they'll be engaging with your prototype that way and answering questions verbally or through multiple choice or whatever question format you chose in your study. Another tip is to tie all of these prompts into those research questions, because that helps you stay narrow, that helps you stay focused on what you're trying to learn from them.
I had no idea how research-driven this was. Yeah.
Yeah. And while we're talking about sort of how user tests work, and Francis has given us great information on how these are structured and all the thought that goes behind them. I also wanted to say that your UX team likely has user testing on the same platform happening in their design process. And as content designers, it's excellent to get involved, whether it's as small as, hey, let's make sure the labels on this mock are clean before we start giving this to people and not placeholder text. Or you can even start adding your own questions into the test that you'd like to see. And sometimes I'll even put in some language that I'm working on and just sort of see if I get reactions in the participants while we watch the recordings. And so there was one test in particular where we did this really awesome prototype. And by we, I mean mostly my amazing designers. But I worked with them to integrate the questions for the test into this actual prototype. So they aren't switching between the user testing platform for the questions and then the prototype for the actual exploration. So what these designers did was we have this little welcome, and this is where I helped them lay out the scenario of what we are asking them to do. And then we have these animations playing for, it's basically an A/B test. We have one side, you get to see how that works. And then I will jump to the end. You play the next side. And so once they have seen both sides, we let them go through and play around with both of them and interact with them and speak aloud while they're going. And then, of course, the instruction of when you're done, you got to go back here and finish the actual user test. Otherwise, none of this counts. And so I thought this was a really great way to integrate content design into this test, not just for helping the labels in the designs, but actually tailoring this question and answer part where we're asking participants to speak. We want to make sure we're getting feedback that's really useful to not just the user experience, but to their understanding of where they are, what they're doing. Especially when you're comparing two different versions of the same thing, you really want to see which one is helping you understand what you're doing, which one's easier to navigate, which one has the easiest way for you to find the information that you need. So I thought this was an excellent example of how we can get involved with UX user testing. But I always just recommend keep an ear open. There's usually something going on the UX team.
Oh my God, this side-by-side thing is incredible. That's I've never done a test like that. That's amazing.
I was incredibly impressed when they showed that to me. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So if you have capacity within your team for more robust and rich experiences like that, by all means, like go for it. I love it. And I also have like some tips and tricks for content designers that are going to do sort of a self guided study, and I can go ahead and share that on here. So here are some tips and tricks if you're a content designer and you're planning to run your own study and you're making a test plan and you're figuring everything out. First and foremost is to keep the scope of your study narrow. You want to be hyper focused on what you're trying to learn, because you're doing this within a 2 to 3 week time span. You need to be realistic on what you're going to achieve out of the study and the length of time you're expecting participants to spend engaging with this prototype. Some of these lessons are just pain points that I'm going to share so you don't have them, like keeping an offline copy of your test plan. So just don't work directly in user testing at the time that you're writing your prompt and planning your study. Use a Google Doc, something, anything, even Notepad is better than using user testing until you're ready to put your prompts in there. Try to stay under about a dozen steps. Those tasks in user testing that each take a little bit of time. It increases the length of the study. I think even the cost of it. So you really want to be realistic again about the time that you're asking people to spend on it, so you have their best focus and attention. You also think about which parts of the screener can and cannot be changed after publishing. So I call them like attributes of the person. When you pick things like geography or language spoken, those are things that will stay. You cannot change those after you publish your study. You can change things like the screener questions, like did you use Adobe Photoshop? You can change those kind of questions, but just be mindful of that, because you may realize you got too narrow and you try to expand something and say, oh, yay, I'm going to include Germany and England, and then you realize you can't. I also recommend requesting a separate Figma file for your test. It should be temporarily made public, and most likely you'll want to disable the hotspots that show where to click. You've probably seen those in Figma Prototype, where a little blue box tells you everything that is clickable. Depending on what you're testing, you might not want to reveal that to your participant. And if you take nothing else out of this segment on tips and tricks, is to run a first test of the test. This is the number one tip. To always do a test of the test. You're going to figure out logistically if there's an error, if the question is not asking what you think it's asking. The Figma file was not publicized, for those who have the link, all kinds of things. The next important one here is to plan about 6 to 8 sessions per study. So that's about 6 to 8 participants total. This is based on guidance from R&I that says that you're going to start getting repetitive insights after around the eighth participant. I'm paraphrasing this, but you're going to get the meat of what you're trying to find established somewhere around 6 to 8 times. And then after that, you're just sort of getting repetition, and finding the same thing out over and over again. And it may not be the best use of your time. Again, use discretion based on what you're trying to study, But since you're very unlikely to achieve, hundreds and hundreds of sessions and then watch them, this isn't the place where you're taking a survey and trying to be statistically significant. And which leads, of course, the next step about avoiding surveys and questions where you need a larger sample size. So I mentioned, as I mentioned, you definitely consult with R&I throughout your process of drafting the test plan. They're an amazing resource. And once you're ready, publish those results and get them out to as many people that would be interested as possible.
That is awesome.
I can show a couple quick things. So one more content-led thing you can do is conduct a heuristic evaluation. And so let me grab this. Yeah, so you can always conduct a heuristic evaluation. And this is, it can be just you, it can be other content designers working on this with you. You can get PMs, UX involved. But this is just a really great way to walk through what you're working on and give it some points and start to see where you think you might be able to identify either places for more testing or places where you might need to do some more explorations. And so this is always a great resource for us that you can also use. And we didn't talk a lot about data because usage data can be quite hard to get your hands on. I did, and this is an example, I did do a project one time where we were working with an engineering team that specifically was into the usage data, and we were doing an adoption project. So it was really like, we need week by week updates on the usage data. And so we ran basically an A/B test in the app, which is super rare. Like, we don't really get to do that often. But we were comparing having a docked composer that would either link out to a help document or to a new at the time format called a guided tour. And so we were able to compare the conversion rates between both. And from the immediate moment that this went out, we saw a huge improvement of people engaging with this docked composer when we linked out to a guided tour. And that just kept getting bigger and bigger as we went on. So anytime you're able to get usage data, and sometimes you can work with a PM to get some of that, or even engineering as well, that data can really help us see either content formats like this. You can even maybe try to test button labels or other ways that you're asking a user to interact. Work with your PM to put in the PRD that you want something instrumented so that we can get usage data from it, which I do all the time. So when we're looking at designs, I'll say, hey, by the way, can we make sure that we instrument this? Because I want to make sure that I can see that, are people actually going to click that? If they're confused, I can add more content later. So these are some decisions that I can also make when I can get this data. But again, it can be a little rare. Unfortunately, we don't always get to have it.
Boy, truer words never spoken. Sometimes the data is hard to get. Now, I'm assuming if I'm new, that there's forums where I can talk to fantastic experts like Colleen and Francis and get your advice and guidance. Is that the case, or where would people go?
Yeah, tell people where we're at. We are on Slack, as folks watching this most likely are. We are in the process of reorganize some of our content design channels to scale, but I think the CDS Content Design All is probably the best place to start, and we'll be working on that.
Cool. And we'll have links to the things that you've talked about with this when we send this out. Awesome.
Yeah.
I tell you, I honestly knew you were very organized, and I knew that our Salesforce products are so beautifully designed, but I did not know the extent of the data that goes into it. And I will say what I think I said to Lori and Ben, which is, people see something elegant and beautiful and they think it's easy because it's always been that way. And it's hard for people who are not designers like me to just imagine the work that you put into it. Amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I always say this when it comes to like user experience and content design, part of that is, if it's done really well, you don't really notice it. That's kind of the way, if it's done really, really well, you might be pleasantly surprised, but sometimes you almost want to be undetected if that means it was seamless.
Oh, yes, because when I'm using other products, not Salesforce, I notice when I can't get around,
Yeah.
and I'm not happy. So this is
Exactly.
fantastic.
Focus on the interface, that whatever task they were trying to do is now like second on their mind.
Okay, well, this is fantastic.